Hidden shadows, the confluence of occult rituals and dark psychology. The realms of the occult and dark psychology are both shrouded in mystery and intrigue. While the occult delves into hidden and esoteric knowledge, often involving supernatural elements, dark psychology explores the more sinister aspects of human behavior and the mind. When these two domains intersect, they reveal a fascinating and often unsettling landscape where manipulation, control, and the exploitation of psychological vulnerabilities come to the forefront. Throughout history, various occult practices have incorporated elements of dark psychology to achieve their ends. From ancient rituals designed to invoke spirits to modern-day practices of psychic vampirism, the use of psychological manipulation has been a constant thread. Understanding this intersection not only sheds light on the methods and motivations behind these practices, but also provides insight into the human psyche's darker corners. In this article, we will explore the historical context of the occult and dark psychology, examine key occult practices that involve psychological manipulation, and delve into the psychological mechanisms that underpin these practices. Through case studies and examples, we will illustrate how these practices have manifested over time and consider the ethical implications of their use. Historical context. The intertwining of the occult and dark psychology has deep roots in human history. From ancient civilizations to modern times, the quest for hidden knowledge and the manipulation of the human mind have been persistent themes. Ancient civilizations. In ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome, the occult was often intertwined with religion and mysticism. Priests and magicians were believed to possess secret knowledge and powers that could influence the natural and supernatural worlds. These practices often involve rituals, spells, and the invocation of deities or spirits. The psychological impact of these rituals on participants and observers was profound, as belief in the supernatural power of the practitioners could lead to significant psychological and behavioral changes. Medieval and Renaissance Europe. During the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, the occult took on a more structured form with the rise of alchemy, astrology, and ceremonial magic. Figures like John Dee and Paracelsus were not only occultists, but also early scientists who explored the boundaries between the natural and supernatural. The fear of witchcraft and demonic possession also became prevalent during this period, leading to witch hunts and trials. The psychological manipulation involved in these practices often relied on fear, superstition, and the power of suggestion. The Enlightenment and beyond. The Enlightenment brought a more skeptical and scientific approach to the occult, but interest in esoteric knowledge persisted. Secret societies like the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians emerged, blending mystical traditions with philosophical and scientific inquiry. The 19th and early 20th centuries saw a resurgence of interest in the occult with the rise of spiritualism, theosophy, and the work of figures like Aleister Crowley. These movements often incorporated psychological techniques to influence and control followers, emphasizing the power of the mind and the importance of personal transformation. Modern times. In contemporary society, the occult continues to fascinate, with practices ranging from Wicca and neo-paganism to more sinister forms of black magic and psychic vampirism. The advent of psychology as a scientific discipline has provided new insights into the mechanisms behind these practices, revealing how belief, suggestion, and manipulation can profoundly impact individuals and groups. The intersection of the occult and dark psychology remains a potent area of study, highlighting the enduring human fascination with the unknown and the power of the mind. Dark psychology and its relevance in occult practices. Dark psychology is a field that delves into the darker aspects of human behavior, focusing on the manipulation, control, and exploitation of others. It encompasses various tactics and strategies used by individuals to achieve their goals through deceit, coercion, and psychological manipulation. This area of study is particularly relevant when examining occult practices, where psychological manipulation often plays a central role. Occult practices, by their very nature, involve elements of mystery, secrecy, and the supernatural. These practices can range from benign rituals to more sinister activities such as black magic, psychic vampirism, and mind control. The common thread among these practices is the use of psychological techniques to influence and control others. Dark psychology provides a framework for understanding how these techniques work and why they are effective. One of the key aspects of dark psychology in the context of the occult is the exploitation of belief and fear. Many occult practices rely on the victim's belief in the supernatural and the fear it can generate. For instance, curses and hexes are often effective not because of any inherent power, but because the victim believes in their potency and consequently experiences psychological distress. This belief can lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy, where the victim's fear and anxiety manifest in real-world consequences. Another important element is the use of manipulation and control tactics. Occult practitioners may use deception, intimidation, and psychological pressure to achieve their goals. These tactics can create a sense of dependency and helplessness in the victim, making them more susceptible to further manipulation. For example, psychic vampirism involves draining another person's energy, often through creating emotional or psychological dependency. Understanding dark psychology is crucial for recognizing and countering these manipulative tactics. By shedding light on the psychological mechanisms behind occult practices, we can better protect individuals from their harmful effects and foster a more informed and resilient society. Key occult practices involving dark psychology. Black magic. Black magic, often referred to as dark magic, involves the use of supernatural powers for selfish, malevolent, or harmful purposes. Practitioners of black magic employ rituals, spells, and incantations designed to manipulate the will of others, inflict harm, or achieve personal gain. The psychological aspect of black magic lies in its ability to instill fear and exert control over individuals. By creating an aura of mystery and danger, practitioners can manipulate their victims' beliefs and emotions, leading to psychological distress and compliance. The effectiveness of black magic often hinges on the victim's belief in its power. When individuals believe they are cursed or under a spell, their fear and anxiety can manifest in physical and psychological symptoms. This phenomenon, known as the nocebo effect, demonstrates the powerful interplay between belief and psychological well-being. Black magic exploits this vulnerability, using fear as a tool to control and manipulate. Psychic vampirism. Psychic vampirism is the practice of draining another person's life force or energy. This can be done consciously or unconsciously, and it often involves psychological manipulation to create dependency and control. Psychic vampires, as they are often called, use emotional and psychological tactics to feed off the energy of others, leaving their victims feeling drained, anxious, and depressed. The psychological mechanisms behind psychic vampirism include creating emotional bonds and fostering dependency. By positioning themselves as indispensable or creating crises that only they can resolve, psychic vampires ensure a steady supply of emotional energy from their victims. This manipulation can lead to a cycle of dependency, where the victim feels unable to break free from the influence of the psychic vampire. Mind control techniques. Mind control techniques in occult practices encompass a range of methods designed to alter a person's thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors. These techniques can include hypnosis, suggestion, and other forms of psychological manipulation. The goal is to gain control over the victim's mind, often for nefarious purposes. Hypnosis, for example, can be used to implant suggestions or alter perceptions, making the victim more susceptible to manipulation. Suggestion involves subtly influencing a person's thoughts and behaviors through repeated exposure to certain ideas or beliefs. These techniques exploit psychological vulnerabilities, such as the need for acceptance or the fear of rejection, to achieve control over the victim. Demonic possession. Demonic possession is a phenomenon where a supernatural entity is believed to take control of a person's body and mind. This concept is often associated with extreme psychological distress and manipulation. The belief in demonic possession can lead to severe psychological symptoms, including dissociation, hallucinations, and violent behavior. The psychological impact of demonic possession is profound. Victims may experience a loss of identity and control, leading to feelings of helplessness and fear. The belief in possession can also be used as a tool for manipulation, with practitioners exploiting the victim's fear to exert control. In some cases, the symptoms of possession may be a manifestation of underlying psychological disorders, such as dissociative identity disorder or schizophrenia. Curses and hexes. Curses and hexes are spells intended to bring misfortune or harm to others. These practices rely heavily on the psychological impact of fear and belief in the supernatural. The effectiveness of a curse or hex often depends on the victim's belief in its power and the fear it generates. The psychological mechanisms behind curses and hexes include the nocebo effect, where negative expectations lead to real-world consequences. When individuals believe they are cursed, their fear and anxiety can manifest in physical and psychological symptoms, reinforcing the belief in the curse's power. This self-fulfilling prophecy can create a cycle of fear and distress, making the victim more susceptible to further manipulation. Psychological mechanisms behind occult practices. Occult practices often rely on intricate psychological mechanisms to achieve their intended effects. These mechanisms can include manipulation and control tactics, the exploitation of belief and fear, and the profound psychological impact on victims. Understanding these mechanisms is crucial for comprehending how occult practices operate and why they can be so effective. Manipulation and control tactics. Manipulation and control are at the heart of many occult practices. Practitioners often use sophisticated psychological tactics to influence and dominate their victims. These tactics can include deception. Practitioners may use lies, half-truths, and misinformation to create a false reality for their victims. By controlling the flow of information, they can manipulate the victim's perceptions and beliefs. Intimidation. Fear is a powerful tool in the arsenal of occult practitioners. By instilling fear through threats, ominous rituals, or displays of power, they can coerce their victims into compliance. Isolation. Isolating the victim from friends, family, and other support networks can make them more dependent on the practitioner. This tactic is often used in cults and other manipulative groups to maintain control over members. Gaslighting. This involves making the victim doubt their own perceptions, memories, and sanity. By constantly questioning and undermining the victim's reality, the practitioner can create a sense of confusion and dependency. Emotional manipulation. Practitioners may exploit the victim's emotions, such as guilt, shame, or love, to manipulate their behavior. This can involve creating emotional bonds or crises that only the practitioner can resolve. The role of belief and fear. Belief and fear are central to the effectiveness of many occult practices. The psychological impact of these elements can be profound. Belief in the supernatural. Many occult practices rely on the victim's belief in supernatural forces. This belief can make rituals, spells, and curses seem more powerful and real. The placebo effect, where belief in a treatment's efficacy leads to real improvements, has a dark counterpart in the nocebo effect, where negative expectations lead to real harm. Fear as a tool. Fear can paralyze and control individuals. Occult practitioners often use fear to maintain power over their victims. This can involve threats of supernatural retribution, curses, or invoking fearsome entities. The psychological impact of fear can lead to anxiety, stress, and even physical symptoms, reinforcing the practitioner's control. Self-fulfilling prophecies. When victims believe they are cursed or under a spell, their fear and anxiety can lead to real-world consequences. This self-fulfilling prophecy can create a cycle of fear and distress, making the victim more susceptible to further manipulation. Psychological impact on victims. The psychological impact on victims of occult practices can be severe and long-lasting. Some of the key effects include anxiety and depression. The constant fear and manipulation can lead to chronic anxiety and depression. Victims may feel trapped, helpless, and unable to escape the practitioner's influence. Loss of identity. Manipulative tactics like gaslighting can erode the victim's sense of self. They may begin to doubt their own thoughts, memories, and perceptions, leading to a loss of identity and autonomy. Dependency. By isolating and manipulating the victim, practitioners can create a sense of dependency. The victim may feel that they cannot survive or function without the practitioner's guidance and support. Trauma and PTSD. The psychological abuse and manipulation involved in occult practices can lead to trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Victims may experience flashbacks, nightmares, and severe emotional distress long after the manipulation has ended. Physical symptoms. The psychological stress and fear induced by occult practices can manifest in physical symptoms, such as headaches, fatigue, and gastrointestinal issues. This psychosomatic response further reinforces the victim's belief in the practitioner's power. Conclusion. The psychological mechanisms behind occult practices are complex and multifaceted. By understanding how manipulation, belief, and fear are used to control and harm individuals, we can better protect potential victims and address the ethical implications of these practices. Awareness and education are key to mitigating the harmful effects of dark psychology in the realm of the occult. Through a deeper understanding of these mechanisms, we can foster resilience and empower individuals to resist manipulation and control. The power of belief. Belief systems form the foundation of many occult practices. These beliefs often involve the supernatural, mystical, or esoteric knowledge that is not accessible through ordinary means. The power of belief in the occult can be seen in various practices such as witchcraft, alchemy, and divination. Psychological basis. Belief in the occult often stems from a need for control and understanding in a chaotic world. It provides a framework for interpreting events and experiences that might otherwise seem random or inexplicable. Social influence. Belief in the occult can create strong community bonds. Shared beliefs and rituals foster a sense of belonging and identity among practitioners too. The role of fear. Fear, is a fundamental emotion that can drive individuals towards or away from occult practices. It can be both a motivator and a deterrent. Fear as a motivator. Fear of the unknown, fear of death, and fear of loss can push individuals towards seeking answers in the occult. The promise of protection, power, or knowledge can be incredibly alluring. 3. Fear as a deterrent. Conversely, fear of the occult itself, often fueled by cultural and religious stigmas, can prevent individuals from engaging with these practices. This fear can be rooted in the perceived dangers of dealing with supernatural forces. 4. Intersection of belief and fear in dark psychology. Dark psychology explores the manipulation and exploitation of human behavior. In the context of the occult, belief and fear are often manipulated to control or influence individuals. Manipulation through belief. Cult leaders and charlatans can exploit belief systems to gain power and control over followers. By presenting themselves as possessing special knowledge or abilities, they can manipulate the beliefs of others for personal gain. 5. Exploitation of fear. Fear can be used as a tool to maintain control. Threats of supernatural retribution or curses can keep individuals in line and discourage dissent. 6. Case studies. Examining specific instances where belief and fear have played significant roles in dark psychology and occult practices can provide deeper insights. Historical examples. The Salem witch trials are a prime example of how fear and belief in the occult can lead to mass hysteria and tragic consequences. Modern contexts. Contemporary cults and new religious movements often use a combination of belief and fear to attract and retain followers. Conclusion. Belief and fear are intertwined in the fabric of dark psychology and occult practices. Understanding their roles can shed light on why these practices persist and how they impact individuals and societies. By examining the psychological mechanisms at play, we can better understand the allure and dangers of the occult. The psychological impact on victims of dark psychology and occult practices is profound and multifaceted. These practices often involve manipulation, coercion, and exploitation, leading to severe mental and emotional distress. This essay will explore the various psychological effects on victims, drawing from historical and contemporary examples to illustrate the depth of trauma experienced. The nature of dark psychology and occult practices. Dark psychology refers to the study of the human condition as it relates to the psychological nature of those who prey on others. It involves tactics such as manipulation, coercion, and control. Occult practices, on the other hand, often involve rituals, beliefs, and activities that are hidden or esoteric, sometimes invoking supernatural elements. Psychological manipulation and control. Victims of dark psychology and occult practices often experience intense psychological manipulation. This can include brainwashing, gaslighting, and other forms of mental control designed to break down an individual's sense of reality and self-worth. Brainwashing. This involves systematic indoctrination to alter beliefs and behaviors. Victims may be subjected to repetitive messaging, isolation, and deprivation to weaken their resistance and reshape their thinking. 1. Gaslighting, a form of psychological manipulation where the perpetrator makes the victim doubt their own perceptions, memories, and sanity. This can lead to severe anxiety, depression, and a loss of self-trust. 2. Emotional and mental health impacts. The emotional and mental health impacts on victims are severe and long-lasting. These can include post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, Many victims develop PTSD, characterized by flashbacks, nightmares, severe anxiety, and uncontrollable thoughts about the traumatic events. 3. Dissociative identity disorder, IDID. Prolonged exposure to extreme trauma, such as ritual abuse, can lead to DID, where the victim's identity fragments into multiple distinct personalities as a coping mechanism. Depression and anxiety. Chronic feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and fear are common among victims. These conditions can severely impact daily functioning and quality of life. Ritual abuse and its psychological consequences. Ritual abuse involves systematic, prolonged abuse often carried out in a cult-like setting. The psychological consequences are particularly devastating due to the combination of physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. Mind control techniques. Techniques such as sleep deprivation, sensory deprivation, and forced drug use are employed to break down the victim's will and resistance. Indoctrination and fear. Victims are often indoctrinated with beliefs that instill profound fear of the cult and its leaders, making it difficult for them to leave or seek help. Case studies and historical examples. Examining specific cases can provide deeper insights into the psychological impact on victims. The Salem witch trials. During the Salem witch trials, fear and hysteria led to the persecution and execution of many individuals accused of witchcraft. The psychological trauma experienced by the accused and their families was immense, leading to long-term mental health issues. Modern cults. Contemporary cults, such as the Branch Davidians, use a combination of psychological manipulation and fear to control their members. Survivors often report severe trauma, including PTSD and DID. Recovery and healing. Recovery from the psychological impact of dark psychology and occult practices is a challenging and lengthy process. It often requires professional intervention and support. Therapeutic approaches. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, trauma-focused therapy, and EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, are commonly used to help victims process and heal from their trauma. Support systems. Building a strong support system of family, friends, and support groups is crucial for recovery. These networks provide emotional support and help victims rebuild their sense of trust and safety. The psychological impact on victims of dark psychology and occult practices is profound, affecting their mental, emotional, and physical well-being. Understanding these impacts is essential for providing effective support and intervention. By shedding light on these dark practices, we can better protect and heal those who have been affected. Case studies and examples of psychological impact on victims of dark psychology and occult practices. Exploring specific case studies can provide a deeper understanding of the psychological impact on victims of dark psychology and occult practices. Here are a few notable examples. 1. The Salem witch trials. The Salem witch trials of 1692 are a historical example of how fear and belief in the occult can lead to mass hysteria and severe psychological trauma. Accusations of witchcraft led to the execution of 20 people and the imprisonment of many others. The psychological impact on the accused and their families was profound, including paranoia and fear. The constant fear of being accused and the paranoia that spread through the community caused immense stress and anxiety. 1. Trauma and grief. Families of the accused suffered from grief and trauma, dealing with the loss of loved ones and the social stigma attached to the accusations. 1. 2. The Branch Davidians. The Branch Davidians, led by David Koresh, is a modern example of a cult that used dark psychology and occult practices to control its members. The 1993 siege in Waco, Texas, resulted in the deaths of 76 members, including children. The psychological impact on survivors included PTSD and anxiety. Survivors experienced severe PTSD, anxiety, and depression due to the traumatic events and the loss of their community too. Indoctrination and fear. Members were indoctrinated with beliefs that instilled fear of the outside world and loyalty to course, making it difficult for them to leave or seek help too. 3. Ritual abuse cases. Ritual abuse involves systematic, prolonged abuse often carried out in a cult-like setting. Victims of ritual abuse suffer from severe psychological consequences, including dissociative identity disorder, IDID, prolonged exposure to extreme trauma, such as ritual abuse, can lead to DID, where the victim's identity fragments into multiple distinct personalities as a coping mechanism. 3. Mind control techniques. Techniques such as sleep deprivation, sensory deprivation, and forced drug use are employed to break down the victim's will and resistance. 3. 4. The Jonestown Massacre. The Jonestown Massacre in 1978, led by Jim Jones of the People's Temple, is one of the most tragic examples of the psychological impact of dark psychology and occult practices. Over 900 members died in a mass murder-suicide. The psychological impact on survivors and the families of victims included survivor's guilt. Survivors often struggled with intense guilt for having lived while so many others died. 4. Long-term trauma. The families of victims and survivors experienced long-term trauma, including depression, anxiety, and PTSD. 4. These case studies illustrate the severe psychological impact on victims of dark psychology and occult practices. Understanding these impacts is crucial for providing effective support and intervention. By examining these examples, we can better comprehend the depth of trauma experienced by victims and the importance of addressing their psychological needs. Occult practices have long fascinated and terrified humanity, often intertwining with dark psychology to manipulate and control individuals. These practices, both historical and contemporary, leverage fear, belief, and psychological manipulation to exert influence. This essay explores notable examples of occult practices that utilize dark psychology, examining their methods and impacts. Historical examples. 1. The Salem Witch Trials. The Salem witch trials of 1692 are a prime example of how fear and belief in the occult can lead to mass hysteria and psychological manipulation. Accusations of witchcraft were often based on flimsy evidence and personal vendettas, but the fear of the supernatural and the devil's influence drove the community into a frenzy. Psychological manipulation. The trials exploited the fear of the unknown and the belief in the devil's power. Accusers often used psychological tactics to manipulate others into believing in their claims, leading to widespread paranoia. 1. Impact. The psychological trauma experienced by the accused and their families was immense, leading to long-term mental health issues and social ostracism. 1. 2. The Inquisition. During the medieval and Renaissance periods, the Inquisition sought to root out heresy and witchcraft, often using torture and psychological manipulation to extract confessions. Torture and fear. The use of torture was a psychological tool to instill fear and break the will of the accused. The mere threat of torture was often enough to elicit confessions too. Impact. Victims of the Inquisition suffered from severe psychological trauma, including PTSD and long-lasting fear of religious authorities too. 3. Voodoo practices. Voodoo, a syncretic religion with roots in West Africa, has often been misunderstood and sensationalized as a form of black magic. Some practitioners have used elements of dark psychology to control and manipulate others. Fear of curses. The belief in curses and hexes is a powerful psychological tool. Practitioners can manipulate individuals by threatening them with supernatural retribution. 3. Impact. Victims of such manipulation often experience intense fear and anxiety, believing that they are under a curse. 3. Contemporary examples. 1. The Manson family. Charles Manson and his followers, known as the Manson family, used a combination of dark psychology and occult beliefs to manipulate and control members. Mind control. Manson used techniques such as isolation, repetitive messaging, and drug use to break down the will of his followers and instill his beliefs. 4. Impact. Members of the Manson family experienced severe psychological manipulation, leading to participation in violent crimes and long-term mental health issues. 4. 2. The Order of the Solar Temple. The Order of the Solar Temple, a secret society founded in the 1980s, combined elements of occultism and dark psychology to control its members. The group believed in apocalyptic prophecies and practiced rituals to prepare for the end times. Apocalyptic beliefs. Leaders used fear of the apocalypse to manipulate members, convincing them to participate in mass suicides and murders. Impact. Survivors and families of victims suffered from profound psychological trauma, including grief, guilt, and PTSD. 3. Modern cults. Contemporary cults often use a blend of occult practices and dark psychology to attract and retain followers. These groups can range from small, isolated communities to large, organized movements. Psychological manipulation. Techniques such as love bombing, isolation, and indoctrination are used to break down individual autonomy and instill group beliefs. Impact. Victims of modern cults often experience severe psychological distress, including identity confusion, anxiety, and depression. The intersection of occult practices and dark psychology has led to significant psychological manipulation and trauma throughout history and into the present day. By understanding these practices and their impacts, we can better protect individuals from such exploitation and provide support to those affected. The examples discussed highlight the enduring power of belief and fear in shaping human behavior and the importance of addressing the psychological needs of victims. Ethical considerations of occult practices and dark psychology. The nature of occult practices and dark psychology. Occult practices encompass a wide range of activities, including rituals, divination, and the invocation of supernatural forces. Dark psychology, on the other hand, involves the study and application of psychological principles to manipulate and control others. When combined, these practices can have profound and often harmful effects on individuals and society. Moral implications of using dark psychology in occult practices. The use of dark psychology in occult practices raises several moral questions. These practices often involve deception, coercion, and exploitation, which are inherently unethical. Deception and manipulation. Dark psychology often relies on deception and manipulation to achieve its goals. This can involve misleading individuals about the nature of the practices or the intentions behind them. Such deception undermines trust and autonomy, violating ethical principles of honesty and respect for persons. 1. Coercion and exploitation. Many occult practices that use dark psychology involve coercion and exploitation. This can include pressuring individuals to participate in rituals or exploiting their fears and vulnerabilities for personal gain. Such actions are ethically problematic as they violate the principles of consent and fairness too. Harm to individuals. The psychological manipulation involved in these practices can cause significant harm to individuals. This can include mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, and PTSD. The ethical principle of non-maleficence, which requires avoiding harm to others, is often violated in these practices. 3. The impact on individuals and society. Psychological impact on individuals. The psychological impact on individuals involved in occult practices and dark psychology can be severe and long-lasting. Mental health issues. Victims of these practices often suffer from a range of mental health issues, including anxiety, depression, and PTSD. The manipulation and coercion involved can lead to a breakdown of trust and self-esteem, causing long-term psychological damage. 4. Loss of autonomy. The use of dark psychology in occult practices often involves undermining an individual's autonomy. This can include manipulating their beliefs and behaviors, leading to a loss of personal agency and control over their own lives. 5. Social isolation. Victims of these practices may also experience social isolation. The manipulation and coercion involved can lead to estrangement from family and friends, further exacerbating the psychological impact. 6. Societal impact. The impact of occult practices and dark psychology extends beyond individuals to society as a whole. Erosion of trust. The deception and manipulation involved in these practices can erode trust within communities. This can lead to a breakdown of social cohesion and an increase in suspicion and fear. 7. Stigmatization and marginalization. Individuals involved in occult practices may face stigmatization and marginalization. This can include social ostracism and discrimination, further exacerbating the psychological impact and hindering their ability to seek help. 8. Legal and ethical challenges. The use of dark psychology in occult practices also raises legal and ethical challenges. This can include issues related to consent, coercion, and exploitation, which may require legal intervention and regulation. 9. Conclusion. The ethical considerations of occult practices and dark psychology are complex and multifaceted. These practices often involve deception, coercion, and exploitation, raising significant moral concerns. The impact on individuals can be severe, including mental health issues, loss of autonomy, and social isolation. The societal impact includes erosion of trust, stigmatization, and legal and ethical challenges. Addressing these issues requires a comprehensive understanding of the ethical principles involved and a commitment to protecting individuals and society from harm. By shedding light on these practices and their ethical implications, we can better understand the risks involved and work towards creating a safer and more ethical society. It is crucial to promote awareness and education about the dangers of occult practices and dark psychology, and to provide support and resources for those affected.